Jeanne Ives, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois channel. It's been a long time since we've had a chance to connect. And you've had some changes yourself over the last year. So I will say for the audience, Jeanne and I are going to have kind of an interesting, hopefully interesting conversation as we go back about a couple of things. One, what she's doing, and to some extent also talking about the Illinois channel, which I will mention for the viewers is 20 years old this year. And as I told Jenny off camera the other day, that one of the very first things, just to put it in perspective, that we recorded on the Illinois channel was Governor Blagojevich being sworn into office in his first term in January of 2003. So that kind of gives you some perspective. There's been a whole lot of history, including the Blagojevich ultimate impeachment and Obama becoming president over that time. And Jeanne, you've been there for quite a while of that history. So thanks for joining us. And why don't you just give us an update briefly on what you all have been doing over the last number of years?
Well, first of all, Terry, it's a pleasure to join you on this basically your 20th anniversary year to talk about what's been going on in Illinois. After I did not win Congress in 2020, and I know you ran such a hard race in 2022 as well, wasn't successful. It's very difficult to run in the state of Illinois, honestly. But so after that, I figured that most people don't like the policies that are in place right now. They just don't know what they don't know about the policies and the politicians that are imposing these issues on them. So rather than fight, they just leave. And instead, I think what we need is more conversations about what's really going on. And so we started Breakthrough Ideas in 2021 to essentially talk more about the policy and the issues, because if we don't, we're never going to turn Illinois back to being the prosperous state that it used to be, like it was 30 years ago when we first moved here. So that's basically what I've been involved in, is a lot of policy discussions.
The governor gave his address, the budget address, the other day. And of course, COVID, among all the other changes, COVID changed the world for everyone for a couple of years. And we're now just kind of coming out of our rabbit holes. The governor noted as he started his budget address that it was the first time he had addressed the House chamber in person since his first term. So here, let's just take a listen to some of the things that he was noting he accomplished financially with the state over the last couple of years.
Our fiscal progress is remarkable. Remember the $230 million in college Illinois debt? Paid. Remember the $900 million in group health insurance debt? Paid. How about the $800 million in Thompson Center liability? Paid. The people clapping are the ones who work there. The unemployment trust fund, $4.5 billion of debt, paid. The $1.3 billion debt owed to Illinois' treasury funds that had been swept by previous governors, paid.
So, Jeanne, there you are. Governor Pritzker has apparently solved a lot of the financial problems that the state had been plagued with. What's your response to what the governor's saying?
Well, it's laughable. And I mean, I want to hear what you have to say about this too. As you've been there for 20 years, you've been through all the dysfunction, but this man is taking credit for using federal taxpayer money to solve the problems that his own party created for the last 2 decades. That's it. That's period. He's pretending to be the firefighter whose party was actually the arsonists. I find it unbelievable. If anybody believes that this guy is responsible for putting us on a better fiscal footing, or that even we are in that much better of a fiscal footing, then I mean, look, I got swampland in Florida to sell you, right? And by the way, you might as well go to Florida because he's touting the fact that he put money in a rainy day fund. Well, Illinois has maybe $1 billion now in the rainy day fund. Okay, good. That's great. That's a great start. It's a fraction of what Florida has. They have $20 billion in surpluses. And also it's about half of what I believe Indiana has. So, I mean, anybody who thinks that this governor solved these problems has not been paying attention like you have, Terry, for the last 20 years.
Well, the thing I would say is it is good that we have money into the rainy day fund. It is good that the governor put an extra $500 million towards the pension. Then if you started or continued that, you would obviously catch up in a lot of times. But the fly in the ointment, not to pick on the governor, but just to be honest in our communications about what's going on with the state of Illinois and their finances, is that because of COVID, the federal government passed bills in the trillions of dollars and sent that money out to the states. So the governor is awash on a temporary basis with billions of dollars that they got from the federal government. That's what allowed all of these things to be paid. Is it good they were paid? Yes. But the problem is there's been no systemic changes to the state to really fix the problem. So we haven't done anything to the pensions to stop them from continuing to have even more unfunded liabilities. We haven't just cut back on the spending. A few years ago, let me ask you, when you were in the state legislature and you were in there for 6 years, what was the budget of the state of Illinois during your years?
That's a great question, because the budget that he's proposing is nearly $50 billion. Nearly $50 billion. It wasn't but maybe 4 years ago that the budget was $40 billion. Well, back when I first showed up in 2013, we were talking about general revenue budgets of about less than $30 billion, about $29 billion. That's what we were talking about. So in essentially 10 years, you've gone from $30 billion budgets to $50 billion budgets. And the only way that this was possible was with this federal COVID relief money coming in and flooding the state with all this fungible money, giving people lots of income or money to replace lost income, in some cases to actually double up some of the income. And so that income's getting taxed. So you have an influx of individual and corporate income taxes coming up. I mean, that's basically what's going on here. That money is not sustainable. These budgets are not sustainable. And unlike other places that provided permanent tax cuts to citizens when all this federal money come in, the state of Illinois did a very small temporary tax cut, and that was just for about 6 months.
Yeah, and nothing's been done as far as the property taxes. Nothing's been done as far as cutting duplicate.
Can I stop you there
Yeah.
for a minute? I mean, he basically mentioned in his speech that he was glad to see that property taxes were going down. I don't know what planet he's living on, because that is not the case.
Maybe he was talking about Tennessee. I'm not sure.
Yes, probably. So.
But so we have a host of things. What are driving people to leave the state? Other states are picking up population. Indiana, Tennessee, Florida, Texas. I mentioned I had within the last 2 years, or even the last 18 months, I had 2 of my sons living in Chicago. They've both moved out, one to Florida and one to Texas. And they're not even homeowners. So, between the property taxes, the duplicative regulations on businesses that make it more expensive here, and you go on down the line to try to say we're going to build a robust economy in Illinois. How are you going to do that when you're just not competitive compared to other states on your regulations, on your taxes, and on your property taxes? Because don't forget, it's not just home owners' property taxes, it's the property taxes on businesses as well. So if they can build a massive plant in Tennessee or Florida or Texas and save millions of dollars, they're going to do that, which is, we can look at Elon Musk moved Tesla from California to Texas for that very reason.
Yes. Well, we do have the same problem here, and so about 2 weeks ago now, Governor Ron DeSantis came to the state of Illinois. He also visited Philadelphia and New York City, and he was basically talking to law enforcement officers and about crime. Well, because he was coming to to Chicago area, uh, all the Democrat leadership, Lightfoot, all the mayoral candidates, Governor Pritzker, Sean Casten, all these folks just basically name called Ron DeSantis. He's a racist. He's a homophobe. He's a right wing extremist. You name it, anything that they could talk about Ron DeSantis, they did. But when you do look at the tale of the two governors and you look at them fiscally and other measures of I would say common sense, Florida outshines Illinois. And even the governor should admit it. After all, his wife and his daughter escaped to their home in Florida during the COVID crisis when he had us completely locked down here. But I mean, there is literally no comparison between the two states. Florida leads in migration, and Illinois for the last 9 years has had out migrations, and in some of those years leading amongst all states for out migration, and in all the other years being in the bottom 1, 2, or 3 for out migration. So, I mean, if they want to compare the two states, if he, there is no comparison. On top of it, in all of his signature issues, which in the case of Governor Pritzker, he really, really wants to attract electrical vehicle manufacturers and also electrical vehicle battery makers. And in 0 cases as he won those bids to bring companies here to do that. 0. They got outbeat by in 18 other cases when it comes to battery manufacturers. They all went to other states. In most cases, those states were right to work states. In most cases, they were states with a much better fiscal outlook.
Let me jump to a couple of things here. I don't want to make it sound like we're just picking on the governor. I would say in some ways he's done a better job being the governor, but on the other than Governor Rauner. On the other hand, I would say, and by the way, if you don't remember, Jeanne was no fan of Governor Rauner. She ran against him for the Republican nomination to try to defeat him. It's easier to be the governor when your party controls the legislature as Governor Pritzker does. And so to be fair to Governor Rauner, he never had the control. But that said, another thing, as we tape this, just last night, Paul Vallas and Brendan Johnson are the two remaining Democratic candidates for vying to be the new mayor of Chicago. Lori Lightfoot was not included, so her term is going to end on April the 4th when whoever of the two is the new mayor of Chicago. What reaction do you have to that? Because as everyone knows, Chicago is the Goliath in Illinois that really kind of controls the state, both politically and almost every other way. Do you have any hopes for Chicago and for Illinois now that we're going to have a different mayor?
Well, I like Paul Vallas. He's been on my podcast before. I consider him a friend. I was very disappointed when he also went after Governor DeSantis simply to try and curry favor with Democrats so that he could win yesterday. He won. He was the top vote getter. That's great. I know he's got grand ideas and he's hopefully going to build a coalition to get those across. I don't actually know, though, if he will win. I think that the public sector unions are so strong in this state, and specifically in Chicago, and that the identity politics still rules the day in Chicago. So I'm not sure he's going to have a really, really tough fight beating off Brandon Johnson, who has the backing of the public sector unions. And while Chuy Garcia had some of that, I think a lot of that support will now go to Brandon Johnson because all they're going to want to do is protect their turf. So it's a low turnout election season. It's whose side is most motivated to vote will turn out. So we'll see. It's going to be really difficult for Paul Vallas to hit 50%, in my opinion. And if he does, he's going to have a lot of opposition to imposing some of the policies he wants. So I'm not hopeful. I am not hopeful. I think that we saw in the 2022 election that people still are numb or ignorant of many of the fiscal problems, both in Chicago and the state of Illinois. And I think until voters really feel it personally, they're not going to vote differently. And if you put somebody like Brandon Johnson in charge, the city's already in worse shape than Detroit, but it is absolutely headed to bankruptcy.
Well, it is, and that's not an opinion.
No,
That's
that's
just a
fact.
financial fact.
Actually, it is. It's technically bankrupt, and so is the state of Illinois. They owe more than they own. They're technically bankrupt.
I don't know anything about Mr. Johnson to really be fair to him. I would say this: Paul Vallas, by contrast, has job experience, life experience running big organizations and big budgets. And he's had some success doing that. And we saw what happened when Lori Lightfoot came in. I think, in my estimation, this is my opinion, but that she was in over her head from day one and never really got her feet on the ground. Now, she had to deal with COVID just like everyone else did, but Chicago is in desperate straits, and I would say my observations would be that Paul Vallas would be the better of the two men to give Chicago a chance to survive and turn around. I think Paul Vallas is ready to make the tough decisions that need to be made. I'm not sure Mr. Johnson would.
Well, but in order to do that, and if we turn back to sort of Springfield and the state, which really controls a lot of everything that goes on, even at the local level, if we look at that, I would say that the state legislators that are down there now, the ones that are on the Democrat side, are far more progressive than they were even a decade ago, maybe even 5 years ago. And I don't think that that bodes well for either Chicago or Paul Vallas getting anything done if he is actually the winner on April 4th. And so, I mean, just looking at that alone, it's a very, very concerning. Some of the bills that I've seen going through the legislature, they want to keep the progressive left ideas going. They've got, I mean, the graduated income tax is back up as a proposal again. It just, they want illegal drug injection sites that are manned. I mean, this stuff is just harebrained crazy.
And we have seen what's happened to California. California is, arguably the most beautiful state in the nation, perhaps aside from maybe Hawaii, but in the continental United States, it's hard to beat California as far as the landscape and the weather. But man, have they screwed it up. And they've screwed it up with these very kind of policies. I mean, it's just, you go on and on. So many of these policies, and you wish they would learn from them. And we have the comparison of the states. We talk about the states being the laboratories of democracy.
Right.
It seems as if the leadership in Illinois, political leadership for many years, has been blind to what's been working in other states and why states like Florida are succeeding, states like Texas and Tennessee. And yet they keep doubling down on some of these policies that have bankrupted the state and made it harder on businesses and driven both people and businesses out of the state. I started to ask when you brought it up, how has the political world changed over, let's say, the last 20 years or so? And you've been plugged in for most of that.
Well, we know in Springfield, politically speaking, the Republicans have even less power, less influence because their numbers are so low. So I think that's one thing that's really changed. I think that the Republican Party has largely been ineffective in messaging directly to the voters and raising the money to do so. I am on the State Central Committee. I am going to try and change that. I think if we tell people in more in real terms what's happening to their state and who to vote for to change that, I think that they may change their vote, but it takes a lot of voter outreach to do so. So we are going to increasingly become a state, unfortunately, where you've got very, very wealthy folks that are just going to be doing fine. You've got a underclass that is very needful of government assistance, and that's probably going to continue. And then you're going to have a middle class that, for whatever reason, because they like the Cubs or the Bears or their family lives here, or they're waiting for their kids to graduate, or they've got kind of a cash cow business that they just can't extricate themselves from because it's more expensive to move. They're going to continue to, take it on the chin. They're the ones who are going to be hollowed out. Their earning power is going to be less. And over time, their kids will leave too. You will see that happening. I mean, 12.5 million people don't just go away, but what happens is everybody's quality of life gets a lot less. And if our schools do not arrest the declining enrollment, the ever increasing property taxes, and the absolute sexualization and indoctrination that's going on in those schools, you will see people leave over the school issue. And our neighbor Iowa, guess what? They just instituted educational savings accounts, and we're ignoring that.
And
at
that
this
would
time
allow
of
for
our
school,
peril.
that would allow for school choice, the educational
Yeah,
savings account.
Yep.
Here's a question. As we say above it, where are we now? Can the Republicans make any inroads in Chicago, or is it the case that they are just born and raised Democrat and they're just never going to change no matter what, no matter how bad the leadership, I mean, they reelected Rod Blagojevich, for goodness sakes, can anything be done? And then the problem is, it used to be, Chicago was always Democrat, but it used to be DuPage County, where you are, was heavily Republican. Now it's not, because so many people, because the schools are bad in Chicago, move out and they move into DuPage County, but they still vote Democrat. So it's almost impossible. And we see the result is that the Democrats in the legislature have supermajorities in the House and Senate, and the Republicans are like a broom stuck in the closet. They really have virtually no impact to pass anything or get their ideas considered.
No, that's 100% true. And then and you talk about DuPage County, there's been an absolute demographic shift in the county. You've had Democrats moved in. I see it in my own neighborhood all the time. I'm a precinct committeeman. I see it. But and they moved out here for better schools, crime-free streets, nice parks, all of that. Quality of life is much better out here. And as soon as you have a kid, you're getting out of Chicago and you're coming to the suburbs. And so that is what's happening. Unfortunately, at the same time, our schools are not performing the way that they should. But the Democrats, they bring their voting patterns with them. It's not untrue. That's absolutely what's happening. And people don't take enough time to look below the surface of their superintendents talking to points or what was true 20 years ago. Oh, the schools are excellent in DuPage County. Oh, I don't think so. In many cases, less than half the kids read or do math at grade level. That is not good. But people are still thinking, well, it's better than Chicago, which only has about 25% of the kids reading and doing math at grade level. So I'm better off. Yeah, but half the kids don't read or do math at grade level in my own school district.
And it's not just Chicago.
But the
Decatur.
People don't want to believe it, though. They spent a lot of money. They bought a house out there. They don't want to believe it. And until it personally affects them, will they ever wake up to what's going on?
And if America is going to remain the powerhouse, and with all the technological changes coming along, we are dooming kids who are not being educated. We are dooming their entire future, their entire lifetime ability to earn. I don't know how you want to talk about equity. Why don't we make sure that they're being educated and giving them a good foundation? We are not doing that. Before we run out of time, one of the major changes over the last 20 years since we started the Illinois Channel is the technology. And, I used to send the programming out on VHS tape to stations across, and look at what we are doing now. And as I was telling Jeanne yesterday as we were talking on the phone, 20 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, I had to tell people what the word broadband meant and what video streaming meant. And now look at us. Jeanne, how are these technologies in your estimation, and you're using them, I'm using them, I'm covering the U.S. Congress the same way I did 30 years ago when I was with C-SPAN in Washington, and now I can do it, from my office here in the Springfield area. What do you see as the possible political influence that these technologies could have on our landscape politically, both in Illinois and the nation, that you and I can now have our own voice, our own broadcast, and we're not having to be just given 7 seconds of airtime on the local commercial TV channels.
They can have a huge impact. I mean, it's just a monumental impact, and I think that they already have. I mean, I think you already saw that in 2020 when they hid the Hunter Biden story, and that was subversive in terms of its use of technology and getting the word out. But more and more people are coming to understand alternative media, and they're picking up on it. And so you've got all sorts of podcasters that are kind of hip and cool. You've got your Tim Pools, you got your Joe Rogans, you got all these folks that you've got the younger set kind of listening to, and those, and those people are going to help change the conversation about what's going on. And so I think that there will be a response. I think it'll take more time than I want it to happen. I mean, we run what we call The Real Story with Jeanne Ives. I have a lot of different guests on to talk about issues from the state level to the federal government level to, war in Ukraine. We've covered a lot of topics. And so we typically do look at Illinois stuff. We hope people listen in for that perspective. And I think as the more voices out there, the better it is. And so I think that's a game changer. I also think it's a game changer if people could learn to actually listen in to the legislative process. And you can do that online at the ILGA website. You can find out when committees are scheduled, and you can actually listen to the quote unquote debate, which is really, I don't know, it's not a debate. Let's just put it that way. And you can see how the lack of debate leads to really bad policies getting passed. I find it infuriating that there's not more emphasis put on backing up your people's assertions with actual facts when we talk about passing legislation in the House. But
when you ran for office, both as a state legislature, as for governor, as far as running for Congress, you're involved, as you said, you're on the state central committee of the Republican Party of Illinois. You go out to these events. A lot of them happen in the Chicagoland area, both Chicago and major political figures, both nationally and, as you mentioned, Governor DeSantis was there the other day. And what's your read on the population, the average citizen? Are they being made more aware? Are they getting more involved? Are they more energized now? Or are they just like shrugging their shoulders, throwing their hands up in despair? And I'm sure some of them are, because why they're leaving the state of Illinois.
Yeah, so let's turn to outside the Chicagoland area. Let's look downstate first. And I think that you have a lot of folks that are aware of what's going on, a lot of people that are more in tune because their state reps, they listen to them a lot more, I think. And I don't know why that is, but I do feel like there's a lot of conversations that are happening downstate to elevate people's understanding of issues. In the suburbs, I say it's true too, but I think that's more a result of what happened under COVID, that people are now activated to get involved, understanding the power of government over their lives. And I think COVID blew that wide open, and people are now saying, well, what's going on? And so there's a whole slew of new candidates running for local office that never thought about doing this ever before in the past, never would have been on the radar, but they started to pay attention.
I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I'm not running now, but I mean, that's why things were just so, the train of government had gone off the tracks. And it was at a certain point, you just say, do you sit there and watch it? There's the famous line by one of our founding fathers that if good men don't run for office, I'm paraphrasing, you're going to be stuck with what's left. And I just felt an obligation to get in. I don't want to go too long. We've already gone longer than we had intended, but you and I haven't had a chance to catch up, and there's been so much going on. I would say, as an aside on media, what's fascinating, and it's just going to continue to change, is that the technologies are changing our democracy, and so we ought to be aware of that. I watch more video these days on YouTube than I literally do on what we used to call television. I don't know what we call television anymore because I can now watch live broadcast on my cell phone.
Right.
But it is all, to me, good for democracy, good for American democracy, because we no longer have the gatekeepers like when I was growing up and we had three, the ABC, NBC, CBS, and that was it.
Right. Right.
So voices like you can get out. I can interview people. You can interview people. And that gives those we interview the chance to get their voices out without, again, just being chopped up on local TV news broadcasts in 7 and 8 second sound bites. I'll give you the last word, and I'd say to the audience, I'm going to look forward to talking to Jeanne more over the coming year because she brings a lot of worldly experience to the table and has always good insights. Plus, she's learning as I am. When you interview other people like Paul Vallas and others, you learn from interviewing them. But Jeanne, why don't you have the last word? Just sum up your thoughts for where we go and from here, and maybe the impact of technology on democracy.
Well, Terry, thank you for having me on your program. It had been a while that I had been on your program, and I thought I really wanted to reach back to you also for my own podcast, The Real Story, because you've got that long-term perspective. You've got that 20 years you've been at it in Illinois, 20 years you've watched what's happened under multiple different governors, under Mike Madigan, under now Chris Welch and Don Harmon, and you've seen the political winds shift a little bit, but yet, you know, Madigan's gone, Welch is in, nothing's changed. Quinn's gone, went through Rauner, Pritzker's in, nothing's changed. I mean, so I appreciate you bringing conversations forward. I don't know if you're still going to the Capitol and interviewing legislators and giving them their 8 minutes on energy policy, education policy, election integrity, whatever it might be. But you were so good to take us right off from the floor debate. Hey, tell us what happened there so that we could get our message out. Before anybody was doing what we're doing right now, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you were there with a camera propped up trying to get real feedback about the debates that were critical for everybody to understand. So I just want to thank you for having me on, and congratulations on 20 years of the Illinois Channel. That's amazing.
Well, thanks. There's always so much more we can talk about. We'll do it in another broadcast, but thanks as always for joining me, and we look forward to doing it again. And folks, if you're watching, tell us what you think. Leave a comment on the YouTube, whether you're watching on Jeanne's channel or the Illinois channel. Let us know what you think, because ultimately you're the ones that, frankly, what we do and what the legislature do is all about. Jeanne, thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.